You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 157 for February 13th, 2019. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's 6-year anniversary show, we reflect on 6 years of public outreach and discuss some upcoming changes. The CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. All right, welcome to the 6th anniversary show of the CRM Archaeology Podcast, everyone. Joining me today is West Coast Bill in California.
Howdy.
Sonia in Utah.
Hello.
Doug in Scotland.
Hi, guys.
Stephen in Calgary.
Hello.
And East Coast Bill in Maryland.
Hi there.
All right, guys. Well, this is probably going to be a shorter show. We just want to do a little bit of a retrospective on the last 6 years. This is the longest running professional podcast in archaeology.
Yeah.
I know. It's been going for, like I said, 6 years. I did one show before that talked about CRM archaeology for about a year. That was my first podcast. And then we started this one. And, you know, with Bill chiming in there, I want to just recognize the first people that were on that first episode and then stuck with us for a little while, but we've gone through fluctuations over the years, was Bill White. He was one of the first people I talked to about actually doing this show. Russell Eileen Willems was on the show as well. Doug Rocks McQueen, still going after 6 years. Sarah Head, who ended up spinning off Archaeological Fantasies podcast and then stepped back from this show as that one started to get bigger, and she really needed to focus on that. And now she's on her own network, and we really launched that thing into stardom. She's doing really great with that. Stephen Wagner has been with us for 6 years.
He won't let me quit.
That's right.
Never.
And Ashley Morton was on that first show. And then, of course, myself. So we have struggled sometimes. We have really had fun sometimes. We've had a lot of really great interviews. I think our 4th episode or something, we had Tom King on. And he's been on a couple times since then. He did a small segment for us. I mean, we've tried to do a lot. You know, we've tried to really make this show a resource for archaeologists and for cultural resource management archaeologists. One of my big goals of doing a show like this was not just to discuss things that are important to the field of CRM archaeology, but to create a back catalog and a resource that people can go to, you know, find out something they know. That's why I put tags in the episodes, and I try to get the show notes with keywords in them so they're searchable, and we make sure that these are things you can find. If you're listening to this show for the first time, or if you're listening to this show and you're a brand new listener just in the last few episodes, head on over to arcpodnet.com/CRM Arc Podcast. And over on the right side of the page there, if you're on a desktop device, if you're on mobile, it might be down at the bottom somewhere. There's a search field, and just try typing stuff in. And you can usually find just about anything you want to find on cultural resource management archaeology. I don't think there's much we haven't covered on this show, and in 6 years, and 156 episodes prior to this one. So a lot of podcasts only make it a few episodes, and to make it even to 100 is amazing. And to make it to 156 podcasting every 2 years, quite frankly, with people that have some of the most challenging schedules on the planet, trying to coordinate across the world with people that have jobs that are unpredictable, it's a feat in and of itself. Yeah, I know.
Something to be proud of, Chris.
It really is. I know. Sonia, you're a business owner, and I mean, you're, as most small business owners do, you're doing some work this weekend. We haven't heard from you in a few months because, well, you're working.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm swamped.
So it's good.
In a good way.
I know. Swamped is better than not. I know.
I mean, it's just, I got to get reports done. It's the winter. So I'm writing and writing.
That's right. That's right. And at the very least, two PhDs have been gained while doing this show. Doug, yours was first. Doug is still over in Scotland. I remember, Doug, you had some issues, possibly having to leave Scotland, but now you're still in Scotland and you're still killing it over there. How's the last 6 years been for you, man?
Yeah. I'm about to get permanent leave to remain. Knock on wood, come sometime in August. So
Nice.
After that, it'll be a lot harder for them to kick me out. Yeah, it's always touch and go because you can either do like a 5-year wait or a 10-year. I didn't qualify for the 5, so trying to be able to stay in a country that really hates people who are different and not from there is always tough.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's still working out.
It is nice. And Bill, you've gone through quite a bit during the last 6 years of this show, from just working where you were and doing what you were doing, and children, and then university, and now you're a professor.
Yeah, no joke. It's kind of crazy, that whole path. My daughter wasn't even born when we started doing this. Now she's going to be 6 in 11 days. So
yeah.
And then also going from the field doing CRM. I mean, I remember us having a call one night it was raining actually in Arizona. Mm-hmm. So it must have been the wintertime. And we met each other through blog and talked about being on the podcast. And I talked for a long time, and we had like the same conundrums of being in the maelstrom of the Great Recession and getting laid off, and how the companies were all just, scrambling to keep themselves alive and closing ranks and a whole bunch of different stuff. And I remember us deciding, we should really start a podcast and start talking about this stuff. And you already had one episode by that time, and then it was all reframed and turned into the podcast that we've got.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. It's been something. 6 years. Stephen, you left the country, so
Yes, northward to freedom.
Northward. You got over before we put a wall up.
Yes, well, it's for the northern border. The joke is it's going to be like a privacy hedge. So
privacy hedge. I like it.
You can see through it, right?
Maybe.
Okay.
Nice. And you took Ruckus with you. Ruckus has been like he really should be on our logo, I think.
Yes, well, there was a brief period where he was listed as one of the hosts. So I don't know if you pulled that or if he's still up there.
I may have pulled that. I'm not really sure. We've retooled a few times, but Ruckus really should be on there because he's such a huge part of the show at this point.
He has a lot to say.
He really does. East Coast Bill. So you just joined us a few months ago, and I'm curious because I don't know if I asked you this before, but do you remember when you started listening to the CRM Arc podcast? Like how long ago?
It was probably about 6 years ago, but it was probably during the summer. Okay, you'd already had a few episodes in the podcast. By that time, I was beginning to do a lot of sort of telecommunications based archaeology in central and eastern Pennsylvania, and I live in Maryland, so it would frequently be 3, 4, 5 hour drives each way, and these would be day trips. And so I was starving for content. And so I'm desperately looking for anything archaeology related while out there. And I stumble upon the podcast, and it becomes a huge fan from there. Then the APN gets launched a little while later, and I become a member of the APN. And I had the fortune of being interviewed on the CRM Archaeology podcast back at the 2017 SAAs in Vancouver. Which was sort of my first sort of voice, if you want to do the deep dive of when I first appear on the podcast. Then did another interview a few times later with Stephen hosting. And then finally, late last year, in the fall last year, I finally come on as a co-host. I sort of made full circle from person desperately seeking content to content producer. It's the full gambit.
Yeah. Nice. Well, that's what I like to hear. And, I'll say this probably again at the end, but that is one thing that keeps a podcast like this fresh is really bringing in new perspectives. East Coast Bill was familiar with our format, and then, came in, was easily able to really just kind of slot right in, especially as a professional, having done this for a long time at all phases of the game, and can really comment intelligently on some of this stuff. So, if you're interested in coming on and becoming another co-host, we could always use somebody to come in. You don't have to be here every week as you hear on the show. Sometimes it's just me and one other person, and that's okay. But we do like to have those fresh perspectives and bring you into the system. And especially, Sonia was mentioning this at the beginning, and I think I've mentioned this before. We want to get some more really field diversity on here. Some more field techs, some more women.
Yeah.
Yeah, get these perspectives.
Please.
Because Sonia's feeling lonely.
I'm feeling lonely.
We've almost always had at least one woman, and for a long time we had two with Ashley and Sarah, which is great because you need, when we're talking about these topics, especially, in topics in CRM archaeology, I mean, it helps to have as many perspectives as possible, I think, which is why this needed to be a panel style show with people of different backgrounds, different living locations, different work experience.
I would agree with that. Most definitely.
Yeah. So that's, if you're interested, Chris at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com, or just go to the website. There's contact info all over there, archpodnet.com. And like I said, you're not really committing to a whole lot. You're committing to come on occasionally. I mean, more is better, but coming on occasionally and helping us discuss and work through these topics for the field. So I wish I should go back and listen to that very first episode and see what the heck we even talked about. But I will mention, in the last, over on the website, if you go over to the menu on the top screen or hit the little 3-line hamburger icon and you go to the archive, each one of the episodes, each one of the shows that we have in the APN, just because of the way the website host that I use works, we have what's called the past 30. So we'll show you the past 30 episodes of that show. So for these purposes, I can basically see the last year of the CRM Archaeology podcast. And we started out 2018 with a show titled The Minnesota SHPO and CRM Unions, and going paperless, field schools. We went into a couple of really different episodes that this is what East Coast Bill was alluding to, the roll the dice on archaeology one, and a couple others like that. We have an episode just called Adulting from May 9th, 2018. That's awesome. Really all kinds of stuff. The drive time dilemma. I mean, where else can you find episodes like this? I feel like I'm doing an infomercial for, get the 6 CD box set of the CRM Archaeology podcast. Where else can you find?
Actually, I feel like you're gonna ask for money so we can send you a tote bag.
Tote bag. I have tote bags. If you send me money, I will actually send you a tote bag. That's hilarious. Yeah, the company we have for swag, TeePublic, they sent me a bunch of stuff like back when I first signed up with them, and I've just been kind of holding on to it. And I bring it to conferences when I go. So the next time people will see the CRM Arc tote bag, it's actually the Archaeology Podcast Network tote bag. You'll see it at the Society for California Archaeology meetings here in early March of 2019. So, hey, I want to get you guys' opinions, and feel free to just jump in. I've had struggles, I would say, with really promoting podcasting as a tool for public outreach in archaeology, and not really a struggle to the people like you guys that listen and are fans of this show, you guys that are listening now, but a struggle to the other big agencies and CRM firms and other places like that. The things we know, like the SAAs and the SHAs and bigger CRM firms. I've talked to them about supporting the podcast network or doing their own show or coming on and doing things, and really kind of getting resistance from it. And I'm curious. It's not resistance from a we don't know what the heck you're talking about standpoint. They know what podcasting is, but I'm not sure they see podcasting really as solid public outreach. I don't know. Bill, what do you think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because my workshop at the SHA this last time was about blogging and podcasting. And I've given a talk before at UC Santa Cruz about blogging and podcasting, actually trying to spin that into something bigger. I know that the last SHA was another snowpocalypse or whatever, and also it was in a suburb of
St. Louis.
Yeah, St. Louis. So it was pretty low attended, right? But I canceled it because there was only 3 people, and I didn't feel like it was worth it for folks to come a day early to go to the workshop if there was only 3 people, because the way that it was structured, we were going to kind of create some kind. I was going to explain the basics of how it works, but there's hours and hours of videos that show you how to set up a website or how to start your own blog and stuff. So I felt like some of that stuff might be you can find excellent information that's a click by click way to set up your website. I didn't set my website up in 3 hours, right? So I knew that was going to take time, but the motivation was to get a group of individuals who are interested in this so that they were going to start their own blog or their own podcast, and that they were going to try to move forward, and that everybody working together, throughout the year or going forward into the future it would create kind of a community. And, the hope was that we would get more individuals who are going to keep going with doing this kind of work in the future. But I don't know. It wasn't very well attended. There were several other workshops that were canceled. It wasn't just, and I don't know if other people had no attendees. I mean, I don't know if 3 is good for a conference that only has half of the normal attendance or what. But I know that in discussions about this with students and other professors and even, people who run companies, they just don't really understand how this could help them.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of odd because, some concepts, like they understand that the internet exists and that there's data on it and that, that's good for archaeology and stuff. And they understand that they're also creating data because they're archaeologists and that that's good for historic preservation. But, the idea of mixing the two, the internet with knowledge creation or data, that's where a lot of times it all breaks down.
Yeah. I mean, I've always thought that one of the sort of stumbling blocks has been with podcasting. I mean, obviously we're all fans of podcasting because we're here, but it's always seen as podcasting as some sort of separate beast, separate entity, where it's audio documentary. It's no different than short film. If you're doing a radio broadcast, it's just another sort of media outlet. Another thing I tend to see resistance on with folks is this sort of the commitment idea of like, well, why would we want to go for a long-term thing instead of going, a podcast can be a single episode. Say you have a project and you want to do a special, a 1 hour, 2 hour special, just focus on your project. That's it. That's all you ever have to produce. You could go long format if you want, but it doesn't have to be. It could be a short series of only 4 episodes. It could be years long. It could be a single episode. And I don't know if that's penetrated the outer market enough to know that podcasting isn't just about long-term series. It's just audio transferred through the internet, no different than radio, except it's a lot, the thresholds to get into it are a lot easier than some of the other media outlets are. So, I mean, right here, we're all preaching to the choir with this crowd and most likely with our listeners because they listen to podcasts, so they understand the value of it as well. It's the challenges to those who don't. It's kind of like trying to explain the benefits of Twitter to someone who doesn't use Twitter. It's the same sort of thing. It's like to your known audience, you get it, but to everyone else, it's like.
Also, it could be the medium as well. Like a lot of people don't like doing public presentations, and this is not like a medium like a website or a blog, where essentially you can. I mean. Most archaeologists have gone through university or at least high school and stuff where you've been trained to write and you're comfortable and familiar with it. But it's amazing how many people really dislike speaking in public. I mean, because what we're essentially doing is public speaking without a crowd. And yeah, it's amazing how many people really, really dislike that. And also, a lot of people dislike hearing themselves as well. Like your voice in your head is not the voice that everyone else hears. Because you guys have gone back and listened to our podcast, right?
Yeah, I listen to every episode.
Yeah, I mean,
I never listen to the ones I'm on. Just generally,
because me
neither.
I imagine you really dislike. So I personally dislike the sound of my voice. It doesn't sound like what it sounds like in my head. And that's a huge barrier for people because I do that whole recording conferences and presentations, and I would say like at least half the people I record never look at their own and just say yes because they really absolutely hate looking at themselves or hearing themselves speak. So like in terms of talking to a medium, it's not something that people are trained in how to do sort of talks. And, even if you're just taking like a normal conference presentation, most people are terrified of that and really hate public speaking, or even if it's only like 2 people in the room, still absolutely hate it. So you're talking about a completely different medium that's not as easy for people to want to engage. Like people are very happy to consume it, but like actually producing it, it's not something people are familiar with or necessarily would like to do.
Yeah, good point. Well, let's take a first break, and then we will come back and expand on this a little bit and talk about some future possibilities, especially with the last half of the conference season coming up here in 2019. So we'll be right back for this on this 6th anniversary episode of the CRM Archaeology podcast. Hey everybody, Chris Webster jumping in here for our only ad break of the show, and it's not really an ad break. It's a break for advertising our advertising, if that makes any sense to you whatsoever. Check out arcpodnet.com/ads. As I mentioned at the end of this show, which you'll hear in about 25 minutes, we don't really have any sponsors or underwriters or anything for the APN or for this show. We have one, which is WildNote. They're helping us out with some things, but it costs money to do things, and we want to do some more stuff with this podcast. And as we're talking about here in the next segment, we're going to be talking about public outreach and live podcasting and things like that. And it would be nice to get some of our hosts to these events and be able to do stuff like that. So if you currently run a company or work for a big company that does marketing and outreach and has an advertising budget, then please consider advertising on the CRM Archaeology podcast. Again, arcpodnet.com/ads. It's only $150 for a 30-second ad that we will create for you. You just have to give us the bullet points. It's $1,000 a month to underwrite the entire Archaeology Podcast Network, which gets your message in front of 135,000 plus ears. And if you do it for a full year, I'll knock 2 months off the price. And that's a little over 1.2 million listens to your message. So, but beyond that, it's really supporting archaeology, supporting education and public outreach, and supporting our efforts over here. So please contact me, Chris, at Archaeology Podcast Network, or go right over to arcpodnet.com/ads. All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you for listening. And now back to the show. All right. Welcome back to episode 157 of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. And I want to talk about now, still relating to podcasting, what you guys' thoughts are on really thinking about our profession from a 2019 perspective. I mean, Bill White, you're a professor at Berkeley now. Everybody on this show has got some sort of advanced degree, so you've been through a graduate program. I'm wondering about. Well, let me back up for a second. So years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and this conversation is probably still happening, but I don't think I'm as plugged into it as I used to be. And maybe Stephen Wagner, I think you might be, but people were talking about getting PhD students and professors and associate professors talking about having their blogs be kind of counted towards tenure, right? Having their blogs be counted as this like professional thing that you're outputting, even though it's not peer reviewed and it's not published per se. But it's something like that. Well, what about podcasting as professional education? I mean, Bill White, this might be a factor for you.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. I'm glad you brought that up because my activity, my blogging and podcasting does in some ways count for tenure, but what they're really looking for is scholarly production. And I don't think Cal necessarily is keeping a tally on how much money, but I know a lot of other universities, it's how much money and grant money you're bringing in and stuff too. But, my main measurements are if the students hate me or not, and if I write books and journal articles. Those are the two main requirements, at least at Cal. And there's definitely some service stuff, but because the archaeology that I do is community-based, that all counts. So in that service stuff, also, all this blogging and podcasting counts too. So my department head is fully aware that I've been on this podcast and that I've been writing blog posts and other things, and that they're getting hits and sometimes, reaching audiences and going pretty far. So she's aware of all that stuff, and I'm supposed to keep track of it all. I mean, it's kind of hard to keep track of it, but, I have metrics on my website. Now that's just going to count for a piece of my tenure, but really the research and teaching, those are kind of the biggies that they're looking at. So to say that, I mean, the thing that I've always thought about blogging and podcasting is it actually helps you when you're in the job search, especially if you're going to do, some kind of teaching or something like that, because it gets your name out in a way that you're never going to get your name out if you just write journal articles. The journal article I wrote for historical archaeology only has like a few hundred downloads, but this podcast is going to get, multiple thousands in the next, 30 days or whatever. So write an article, 2 years, 300 people, and probably 40 to 50 of those folks were forced through some kind of class to read your article. And then after 5 or 6 years, it'll die off and nobody will download it anymore or even read it because it's already old hat, right? They're just going to look for the citation versus something like this that people will continue interacting with. I think that that's really the biggest benefit. As far as the university system, that blogging and podcasting replacing journal articles, I don't think that's ever going to happen. And I'm pretty sure that we're not going to be able to turn our blogs and podcasts into our teaching obligations. But as far as service, I can see how that could end up being kind of a more important thing. It's not just, did you go give talks at whatever community center? It's, did you also write and publish online, and did you participate in blogs, and how many thousands of people listen to you?
It would be interesting to see, because you mentioned that this stuff will never take place of journal articles and things like that. And the primary reason is those journals are peer reviewed. And that is like the massive currency of education, right? And academia is peer review and having these things looked at and making sure it's solid. So that's why we have that. But there's no reason we couldn't have, like, let's say an audio journal. It might be an easier format for people, but we call it an audio podcast journal or a podcast audio journal, something like that. And the podcasts are peer reviewed. There's no reason they couldn't be. You record them ahead of time, people listen, you edit, you go back and re-record, and you leave these things out. It might be actually easier than doing a journal because you don't have layout and things like that to worry about. But there's no reason why podcasting can't become that, can't become that sort of medium. Maybe I'm thinking way too far in the future. I don't know.
Well, for something like that, I think that we'd have to come up with some sort of like annotation scheme. I guess am I right in thinking that SoundCloud has something like that, where you can actually put things at certain time markers and have it, I think pop-ups and stuff like that. And I think that's the biggest detriment for us to be like academic, is that, we typically talk about stuff and our opinions are informed, but they're still kind of opinions. And a lot of times it's like gross speculation, because we're all like, well, I'm pretty sure it's this. We should check on that after the recording and we'll leave it in the show notes. And so having like a pop-up, that could link to where we're getting these ideas and sources and appropriately attribute what we're saying. I think that would be one of the big hurdles, right? So
you'd almost have to think about it in a completely different way, though, because you're right. You need sources. You still need to cite your sources, and in a journal, in a paper, they're cited either in line or with a footnote, right? So there's no reason you can't sort of do the audio version of that, and you can just, because we have show notes. We have show notes that we have. So. And I'm not saying this podcast in any way, shape, or form would be that sort of podcast that I'm talking about, because you're right. This podcast is about opinions, right? This podcast is about discussing the field and our opinions and experiences and how things are going. Well, this podcast would never be a peer review podcast. It's more of an editorial. So, but if you had that sort of, just as a concept, that sort of podcast, there's no reason you couldn't say during the course of the interview or discussion, I'm referencing citation number 5. Or something like that. And they can go to the show notes and see that citation and then click on it and go to whatever you're referencing. There's no reason for that couldn't exist at all. Plus, there's transcription. A lot of podcasts are transcribed. We're not doing that because it's expensive. We don't have the money for it, but we will. As soon as we have the money for it, it's definitely on my roadmap to have all of our podcasts transcribed, which isn't quite the same as a journal article, but you could have advanced transcription where you're basically taking the show and turning it into essentially an article with footnotes in line. There's no reason that couldn't be done. It's just about money and time. That's all it is. So anyway, this is going to be a shorter show, so I want to move on from this topic, but think about it. Think about the future. It's 2019. Think about some different ways that we can do this. And let's also think about the reasons why we're doing this, right? We're doing this podcast, and we do podcasts, and we do journal articles, and we do all those things because we're trying to tell people about something that we're doing, and we're trying to get feedback on it. I mean, that's really it. Research-based journal articles are a little different. You're really reporting on something you did, but the whole idea is to get feedback on this. And Bill White, I hope that at some point in the future, in the not too distant future, that this sort of public outreach is weighed more heavily on a professor's time, because I think professors in general at the university system, your influence on the future scientists of the world alone is massive. I mean, people always talk about their professors in college and how much of an influence they had on them. And then not only that, but your influence on the rest of the planet as well through your ideas and your opinions. It's one thing to continue doing research. And I know that's how universities stay alive, is they say, we did this much research, blah, blah, blah. But that's not really that important to the public anymore. It's that outreach, you know?
Yeah. And I do feel like the public outreach aspect of podcasting is probably the strongest thing when it comes to archaeology, because, especially this podcast, if there were things going down and we were contacted by communities and they did need historic properties saved, giving them a platform to talk and discuss the way things are going or preservation in their area, I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we could possibly do.
Well, I just want to, as we transition to another topic here, I wanted to ask everyone, because we do it at the end of the show notes, but I know a lot of people skip show notes, myself included, at the end of the podcast, or the outro, I should say. And but share this podcast. Don't share all of them. I wouldn't ask you to do that, because it's your own integrity. If you like what we're talking about and you want other people to hear it, just tap that share button on your phone right there and share it to your favorite social media group, your own personal page, tweet it out, something like that, because we want more people to hear these things, and we want more people to to basically just get the word out about archaeology and our profession. And we've turned a few people on. I always assume, just like in archaeology, if I find a really awesome thing or site or something like that, you got to assume that there's, at least 90% others that you haven't found just because of our survey sampling methods. So I always assume when we get an email that somebody says, hey, I was out of archaeology for 10 years and I got back into it because of your podcast. We've heard that probably 3 or 4 times that I can remember over the course of doing this show, which tells me that there's probably a bunch of others that have gotten back into archaeology, or maybe reignited their fire for archaeology, or, something because of this show. And we love to hear those stories, and we won't put them on the air, but send them to us and let us know. Maybe we'll relate your story on the air and take out your name and things like that if you want, but that would be awesome to hear. So share the podcast, share your stories with us, and let's keep it going. So as far as the future of this podcast goes, I've been, I run the Archaeology Podcast Network, and I also run 3 other shows in addition to this one, and now a radio show that I do once a week. And radio shows are crazy because you can't put that off. Like they expect you to be there. They expect you can't just phone it in. You have to go there to the studio and do a show every Friday at noon. And that is, I thought, well, I podcast, so I figured this will be easy, but it's really not. So that's taking up some serious amount of time for planning and things like that. But I think it's a great second avenue for us to do some public outreach. So let's talk about some other ways we can do this, and some things I'd really love to see at conferences coming up. Because you guys, we always, the big conferences, there's always at least 1 or 2 of us there because they're the big conferences and people go. And then the small regional ones, so a few of us might be at those as well. But I think we should really start doing some more live podcasting. And the live podcasting I've seen done in the past is basically the hosts. They might have an interview or a couple interviews, but they basically get up onto a stage or in front of people in some way, depending on the venue, and they do it. Now, we did it at the, Bill, was that at the East Coast, Bill? Was that at the SAAs in Vancouver?
SAA Vancouver, the panel, the Thursday night thing.
The Thursday night thing that I think you and like 2 other people showed up for, and one of them was my wife. It's that kind of thing, though, and doing it in that venue, I don't really like that. It wasn't well attended because people are there and there's 40 concurrent sessions going on. And why are they going to choose a podcast? They know it's going to get recorded when they could go to something else that they're probably never going to see anywhere else. So that makes sense. But taking over some of these evening events and renting out a venue or trying to do something and saying, hey, come listen to a live taping and be part of a taping of the CRM Archaeology podcast, and we'll see from there. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if Comic-Con can do it.
Well, and that's kind of the model that I'm talking about. I've been to Dragon Con one time when I was in Georgia, and I went there because of the Skeptic Track, the astronomy podcast I listened to was there, and a bunch of other things. So, and almost all of them did like this live podcast where basically they were just up. There was an audience. Sometimes they take questions from the audience. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just doing a show like this, You're just doing it in front of people. And that goes back to Doug's comments about people's insecurity about doing stuff like that in front of people. The weird thing about podcasting, I don't know if you guys are like this, but like I love podcasting in the studio that I'm in now because nobody can hear me. I know like 5,000 people in the first week or so of this podcast coming out will hear this, but that gives me less anxiety than if there were like an audience of people watching me. I don't really know why. Like, even when I record at home, I'm like, don't want my wife to hear me, even though, she could hear the show. It's just really strange.
I have the opposite problem. I don't want you to hear my family.
I feel the same way. You're not alone.
Yeah.
Bill, we can always hear your family. But this lovely voice is young voices. And that's what we want coming up in this industry, right? Young voices.
When the podcast is going on, getting prepared. And then it's gone from changing diapers to somehow rodeo clowning your kids from fighting with each other in the background.
Nice.
That's what my dogs like to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to cut this podcast short. We're not going to do a third segment today just because, we're talking about ourselves and I'd rather give you guys some solid content coming up next time. But we are actively, and Bill White has said he's going to take this on. He's going to start kind of producing for us a little bit, managing our topics. So feel free to go to the podcast page and look up all our Twitter handles and email addresses and send us topic ideas. If you see us on social media, we're all over social media. Most of us are. Send us topic ideas, interview ideas, things you were having a conversation with in the truck on the way out to a site. Things you're talking about on break while you're sitting down in the swamp or the desert or whatever. And you're like, hey, we had a conversation about this. What do you guys think about that? So send us those topic ideas. Just real quick, I'll go down the line in the order that I have them on the screen here and ask you guys, just give me in 30 seconds. If we could do anything we wanted, where would you like to see something like this podcast go in the future, whether it's topics or interviews or whatever? We'll start with West Coast Bill.
Wow. That's a pretty big question. I'd like more people from the field to contact us with questions or come on the show and talk about what's going on in the field, right? Because this is a huge country and there's a lot of stuff going on. So I'd love to know what's going on in other parts of the country when it comes to historic preservation or what other folks are facing in their state or in their community with doing cultural resources.
Excellent. Sonia.
I agree with Bill. I'd like to see more of our field technicians and crew chiefs coming on board with us, talking with us. If they're willing to come on as a speaker or a guest host, by all means. I think it's important to hear the perspectives from the people who we are trying to help, and instead of just all of us more senior level people getting on. Yeah. I'd also, just because it's my interest as well, I'd also like to teach more and talk more about the business aspect. If 80% of our young archaeologists graduating from college are going into CRM, they need to understand business.
Indeed. West Coast Bill. Sorry, East Coast Bill. I can't get the coast right.
That's okay. I'd love to... we want, people to come to us and, to reach out to us and stuff like that. But I think I would like to do more is go out and try to reach people, whether that's doing, more interviews at conferences or even eventually maybe doing interviews in the field, like actually going trench side with a hand recorder, recording a small little talk or something.
Nice.
In fact, I'm going to try to practice what I preach. The upcoming Mid-Atlantic Archaeology Conference in March 21st to 24th in Ocean City, Maryland. I do plan on bringing audio equipment to talk to CRM archaeology professionals so that your voice can be heard here as well.
Hey, that's a great thing to bring up too, because I'm always willing to take submitted audio like that from a conference and really kind of crowdsourcing these conference interviews. Honestly, if you want to try even just recording onto your phone, open up the Voice Notes app. If you're on iPhone, I'm sure Google has similar things. And just hit record. And if it doesn't sound good, we won't use it, quite frankly. But if it, unlikely. So if it's audible and I can clean it up a little bit, then we will absolutely use it. So if you want to interview somebody at a conference or on your site or something like that, absolutely do that. And especially for you guys that are co-hosts here, crowdsourcing this kind of thing and getting these things recorded. That's perfect, Bill. So I hope to have some audio from that conference on one of the next shows.
Yeah, hopefully this will be my first live recording. So wish me luck.
Sweet. Outstanding. And look him up if you're going to that conference and get an interview with him, or, he can sign your Write in the Rain notebook, autograph it.
Yes. Big, I forget what I was going to say anyway. But at Archaeo Thoughts on Twitter.
There you go. All right, Stephen, what's your grand design for the podcast?
Yeah. I think something I'd like to see is a lot more speculative future type stuff where we talk about the issues in the current streamlined process that we do, and talk to people who are trying to change that, and maybe explore different options of like, is the way we're doing it the best way? Are there better possibilities? How is this going to be in 20 years? Nice.
Okay. I love it. Doug, what about you?
Just picking up a little past Steven's thing and thinking, and everyone else's, and to go a little more international. So, CRMs practice different ways in different countries around the world. I'm right now involved in a project trying to make instructional stuff for multiple countries. And it's quite fascinating finding out how people do archaeology in different countries. So in some countries, there's not really prescriptive. It's, do the best archaeology. But like somewhere in the Netherlands, they have a 200-page booklet that tells you exactly how you're going to do your archaeology, and that's how you do it. So it'd be really interesting if we were to expand a little bit and, bring on people from different countries and sort of see with Stephen's thing about talking about, is this the best way? I think it'd be really interesting if we brought in other people who maybe do it slightly different or very, very differently.
Yeah.
And I think that would be some interesting conversations.
No, that's awesome, because that brings up something I have been thinking about for a long time, which is really kind of making the CRM Archaeology podcast more of a series where you've got CRM Archaeology United States, CRM Archaeology Canada, CRM Archaeology, Britain, CRM Archaeology Netherlands, something like that. But have those shows hosted. You're right, Doug, bringing on different perspectives onto this show. Absolutely. But also, I would love to have podcasts on the Archaeology Podcast Network that are in the languages of the countries that they're taking place in, and have those shows on the network. So if anybody's out there happens to be listening to this and you do archaeology in another country, and maybe you would be a good host for that show. I will teach you all you need to know about hosting, and you can use our recording software. I'll be honest, if it's not in English, you'll have to edit the show. So, or find somebody to edit the show, but I'll be more than happy to host it and post it and promote it with all our resources and get it on the Archaeology Podcast Network. I think we need more Spanish language shows for sure, because so many people in this country, in this world, actually are Spanish speaking. It'd be awesome to have something from the Asian side of things. Have something in I don't even know what language we would put it in, but having something over there, and then other countries. So I know Australia has a pretty robust CRM program, and moving on from there. So if you're listening to this, or somebody that might be a good host and could stick to something like this, definitely put them in touch with us, and we'll have that conversation. Like I said, we'll get you started, and then we'll host the whole platform for you. You'll have to do some editing on your own, but I'll show you how to do that. I have the software for that, and we can get that done. So. All right. Well, I want to thank you guys all for joining me. It's rare that we get every single host of the podcast on this episode, but of all episodes, our 6th anniversary episode, I'm happy that you all could join us and keep sticking it out. Special thanks to Bill, Doug, and Stephen for sticking it out for 6 years. I hope Sonia and East Coast Bill make it 6 years. Sonia, you're at least 2 years now. I don't know when you started.
It's been a few years, maybe 2017.
Yeah, something like
16, that. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. So it's been a little while now. So
yeah.
Yeah. And that's great. And like I said, we're always looking for fresh ideas, fresh people to come into the show. As you can tell, the hosts have rotated around, and some have gone on, and some have started their own podcasts, and some have just decided to do other things, which is okay. And even somebody who's a very busy business owner like Sonia can still be an occasional host of this show when she's not slammed with work.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, you don't need the full-time commitment, and full-time commitment really only means 26 days out of a 365-day year. So that's not too bad for. And
it's not even a full day. It's like a couple hours. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, again, thank you, everybody. And one last pitch here. Please share this show. We like other people to hear it. Honestly, we don't get anything from sharing it other than more listeners, which just helps the field. There's no monetizing from sharing this, nothing like that. I mean, obviously we get more listeners, but we don't really have any advertising or anything right now. So people think, oh, you're just doing this to make more money. Yeah, I wish, I wish I could say that this was what I do for a living, is do this podcast, but that's sadly not true. So we really just want to get the word out and to have more people listen to this show. We do this as completely on a volunteer basis. It actually costs quite a bit of money to do this, which we don't make up. So again, not the issue. Just share the show out. If you agree with what we're saying, if you don't agree with what we're saying, start the conversation. And then, especially if you don't agree, come on and tell us all about it.
Yeah, come tell me, because I'd really like to know.
That's right.
How can I help teach better if I don't know if I'm doing something wrong? So
exactly. There you go. Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you. And we will wrap this up and tune in next time for another great episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.arcpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at arcpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thank you, everyone, for joining me this week and for the last 6 years. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we will see you in the field. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
See ya.
Bye. Bye.
There's nothing on Doug's line, but I heard a weird goodbye.
Goodbye.
No, it was my son.
Doug still hasn't said anything.
Yes.
Man, there's no countdown. There's nothing.
No, I already said goodbye.
Did you?
Did?
Yeah, it's about like 10 seconds back. You guys can see it right there.
Oh, it's itty bitty.
My God. All right.
Thanks, Doug.
This show is produced and recorded by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, in Reno, Nevada, at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.arcpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.